It looked like an old steel bulkhead, the kind you would find in the interior of an old military vessel with those large wheels that you have to turn to open the door. Over 10,000 meters of depth and 15,200 psi is what our equipment measured. To find anything man-made at that depth was inconceivable. I couldn't believe it. It was on the side of an especially steep drop. The rectangle of steel, while difficult to spot, did not exactly appear natural. It stood out to me, despite the total lack of visibility. I immediately turned to my partner. "It's crazy how the darkness fucks with your brain if you stare into it long enough," I said. The submersible was a research submarine designed for a two-man crew, but there was barely enough space for one. Stanley was the man next to me. He was my co-pilot and research scientist. "I don't know what you're talking about," said Stanley with a smile. "That rock looks like a cabin door. It's got a wheel and everything." That's exactly what I was thinking. I leaned in to take a closer look. Look how smooth it is too. It seemed we both knew we had to take a closer look. I slowed the descent of the ship and intensified the headlights. There, in the middle of a steep, jagged cliff, over 10,000 meters below the ocean surface, was a door. It was impossible to mistake it for a rock formation. It had perfectly cut edges, rounded and smoothed out, completely symmetrical. It had a wheel in the center too, which coincided with no rock I had ever seen. Without a doubt, it was a door, a steel bulkhead. "How in the world?" I said. "A shipwreck? Here? It can't be in such a perfect condition," I was whispering. We continued our slow descent until the bulkhead was directly in front of us. I halted the submarine with the beams pointing directly at the door. "Take some pictures and send them up along with some data," I told Stanley. I heard Stanley clicking at the machinery. I stood still, staring into the monitor in front of me. The submarine was very small and did not have a window at the outside. Our exterior was displayed on a small screen. I leaned in to get a closer look. My eyes widened. "Wait, Stanley?" I said. Stanley faced me. "The bottom right. Look." Stanley turned his head and looked into the monitor. There, engraved on the surface of the door, near the bottom right, was a very short collection of images. I was amazed that we had missed them before. But as I intensified the headlights again, there could be no doubt that they were there. One of them caught my attention. It was the one in the middle, the third drawing. Very minimalistic, very small, but it was the outline of a skull, a human skull. It looked more like a caricature. The forehead was a little too round and the chin was slightly too short. It looked like a human skull drawn from memory, or at least similar to one. But the other ones, the other 5 pictures, were even more unsettling. The first one, though a little wide, looked like some prehistoric skeleton, or a representation of a fossil. From there, the drawings were nearly incomprehensible. One was a long angular skull that coincided with no animal I had ever seen. Another looked like the depiction of a bug, maybe a wasp or mantis, only bony and cadaverous. The one thing the images had in common was that in some way, they all looked like skulls. "What the fuck?" Stanley whispered. "Quick, take the pictures." I was still staring into the monitor. I watched Stanley take a new snapshot, then turn to his computer. He began typing, transferring data from the submersible. "Alright, it's sending," he said. "What do you think they are?" I was hypnotized. I couldn't stop looking at the door and the caricatures engraved onto it. "Probably a warning, like signs representing a hazard," I said. "The middle one looks kinda like a human skull." Whatever was in there, it didn't take a genius to understand that we weren't supposed to go inside. The lock on the outside, the depictions, the depth itself told us everything. "Hey Alex," I heard Stanley say, and I snapped out of my trance. "It only makes sense to open it." I snapped my head to the side. "Are you insane? It absolutely does not." I raised my voice slightly. Stanley stood still, looking confused. I didn't think I would need to explain myself, and I sighed. "A steel bulkhead 10,000 meters below the ocean surface with half a dozen depictions of animal-like skeletons, of which all but one are familiar, sealed from the outside, And you want to open it? Well, maybe we should get the green light first, I guess. I already asked the crew, he said. Yeah, well, the crew is gonna take my side, I promise you, I said, and Stanley shrugged. It's probably nuclear waste or something like that, and it's definitely not meant to be opened. Stanley looked back at me. Doors to nuclear waste don't have doorknobs, Stanley said. They're sealed airtight, welded shut, and buried with concrete. He had a point, but before I could say anything in response, a message arrived. Proceed. We stared in confusion. They're telling us to open the door, Stanley said. No, they're telling us to proceed with our original mission. Isn't it obvious? I responded. The response was extremely odd. We would typically have received detailed instructions, or at least a well-structured, professional response. Alex, move the submarine forward. I need to get close enough to use the mechanical arms, he said. I was shocked. You're telling me that a group of highly trained, intelligent research scientists just gave us the go-ahead to open a watertight door with 15,000 psi of pressure? The message says proceed. That's the literal definition of a go-ahead. Send another one. Tell them to be clear this time, I told him, though I wasn't even sure why I was entertaining the idea. I heard him typing, and I watched him closely this time. Sure enough, he asked the crew to elaborate and sent the message. We waited in silence for a few moments. We had been delayed enough already. I couldn't wait to leave the door behind. Just then, the message arrived. Open the door. My eyes went wide. Something about the message made my blood freeze. It was unlike any message we had received. I told you, Alex. Now move the submarine forward. Stanley was impatient. Something is wrong. They wouldn't have sent Alex! Stanley screamed. The extremely small cabin made the sound seem louder than it should have been. It caught me off guard. Stanley, I can't do that. You have to understand how unprofessional such a response is. The team would not have sent that. I spoke calmly. Well, they just did. Why are you refusing orders? This isn't the military, Stanley, and I'm still the captain of this vessel, I said. Stanley did not seem happy. He was anxious somehow, and he furrowed his brow in a mixture of anger and confusion. Alex, if you don't move the sub forward, I will. I was shocked. Stanley, listen to me. Alex, if you don't move the submersible forward, I will. Suddenly, he grabbed my wrist and squeezed. We have to go ahead, Alex. Move the sub. I had never seen him like that. Stanley was a large man and his strength was far above mine, but he had always been the kindest, most light-hearted person on the team. What are you doing? Let go of me. Suddenly, he lunged forward and tried to stand. The space was too small for him to stand, and his back hit the ceiling of the cabin. His hand was still around my wrist, and his free hand was moving for the control panel. I twisted my body and managed to get out from under him. I pushed him away while having my back to the wall. It worked with great effort, and he fell back in his seat. Move the ship forward, he screamed, spit flying from his mouth as he did. Stanley, calm down. He seemed to be in a frenzy. His chest rose and fell rapidly, and he gripped his chair so hard that his fingernails dug into the cushions. Stan, what is the matter with you? I grabbed my wrist with my other hand, massaging the area. He had scratched the skin on my wrist and had gripped so hard that the flesh was turning red. Stanley started, taking deep breaths between pauses. I just know that we have to get closer, or else I can't use the mechanical arms to open the door. But why do you want to open the door? I said in disbelief. He made a nasty expression, as if I had said something unreasonable. He took a sharp breath through his teeth. Alex, for the last time, if you don't move the submersible forward, I will, he said. I saw him grip the armrest of his chair even harder. Stanley, it would be illogical to open. He pushed himself off the chair and slammed into me. I was pushed back and my head slammed against the wall beside me. I grabbed the back of my head in pain. By the time I recovered from the impact, I saw Stanley on the control panel. The submarine was moving forward. I leaned forward, but Stanley was still leaning onto my chair and his knee was pushing me down. I tried to push him away, but the space was so small that his back was against the ceiling, and there was no space to push him toward. I decided to grab his hands instead and pull them away from the controls. I pulled at his hands and managed to shift it away from the lever. The rapid motion made the submarine jolt forward, and the sub crashed against the cliffside. We were thrown forward violently, and Stanley's body smashed into the main monitor. He turned around at me, and his face was entirely red. The look on his face was savage. He was breathing through his teeth, and his eyes were nothing but pupils. He jumped toward me, slamming into me and scratching me with his nails. I brought my knee up and smashed it against his ribcage. He screamed, but he continued grabbing at my throat and clawing with his nails. Then, his right hand was able to close around my neck, and he squeezed with all the strength he had. I couldn't comprehend what was happening, but I wasn't going to try to talk my way out of it anymore. Stanley was my friend, but this could not have been the same man as before. I hit him as hard as I could with my knee, but his grip did not loosen, though he screamed in fury. I tried again and again, all of my hits landing perfectly, but he would not let go. The pressure inside my head increased. It felt as if every vein in my head was about to explode. I hit him again, and I was sure that I had felt his rib crack. Still, he only screamed and tightened his grip. My vision was fading. I had to think of something. I saw the monitor, the one displaying the exterior. Stanley had smashed into it, and the support had been destroyed, but it was still connected to its cable. I reached out and grabbed it, pulling at it until the cable snapped and the heavy monitor came loose. I pried it up and slammed down, connecting with the back of his neck. Stanley went limp, falling on my chest. I gasped frantically, holding my neck. I write this now, sitting in silence, trying to process what has just happened. The monitor is gone. The submarine's sight is gone. Stanley's body is limp against me, as I have been unable to push him away in the cramped space, which is now claustrophobic. The only camera left is the one that is connected to the claw of a mechanical arm outside. I am writing this on Stanley's computer. As I do, I keep receiving the same exact message. Turn the wheel. The apparatus that controls the mechanical arms outside is still intact. I know that if I simply reach over and use the small camera to find the wheel, I can open the door. I want to move the submersible away to start my ascent to the surface. Trust me, I do. But I can't. The ballast systems, no matter what I do, won't respond. I am stuck here. I have asked for help, but I only received the same message. Turn the wheel. I'm sorry. I say that because, after all of this, after what happened to Stanley, and without knowing why, I really want to listen. I really want to turn the wheel. Worst of all, I don't even know why. Every message, every signal, and every attempt to communicate with the surface was met with the same response. Turn the wheel. I couldn't take it anymore. My co-pilot's body was slumped against me, blood trickling down from the back of his head and tapping against my suit. The space made it difficult to push him away, but I didn't try anyway. I could only focus on one thing. The door. My mind was practically screaming at me. It was a real painful sensation that made me grasp my head with my hands. I knew that if I only took hold of the control panel, I could turn the wheel with the mechanical arms and end the horrible feeling. If I opened the door, it would all go away. I felt angry, irrationally anxious. It was horrible. I screamed and smashed the computer against the cabin wall. I watched the screen glitch and turn off entirely. I huffed for a few moments before I even realized what I had done. I recovered the computer and tried to turn it on. I failed the first time, but on the second, the screen lit up, though there was a large line running through it. As I was reconnecting it to the submarine's systems, something appeared in the corner of the screen. It was a message. I knew what it would read, but I clicked anyway. As soon as I did, my eyes went wide. It wasn't the typical message. For a second, the need to open the door was gone. Stanley Wilson, report. This is a request for your immediate return to base. Activate your audio communication systems. Brief, shorter than most, but it was a real message. I was overjoyed. I opened the message and activated the microphone. This is Alexander Morgan. Captain, Wilson is unable to report and in critical condition. Ballast systems are offline and likely destroyed. Please advise, I said. I waited for a few moments. Then, the device came to life.
Captain Morgan, Scans suggest that your vessel is near a rock formation, correct?
A voice said. Correct, I answered immediately. I couldn't have been more excited to hear the voice of a member of my team.
There is a way to temporarily enable the ballast systems and allow the vessel to begin ascending. Captain Morgan, take command of the mechanical arms.
The one thing I had been avoiding all this time, for what felt like hours, was to use the mechanical arms. The need to open the door had lessened, but I was still reluctant. I leaned forward and activated the arms. I wasn't going to let an opportunity pass.
Your goal is to push away from the rock formation using the mechanical arms. This will change the pressure within the ballast systems and allow them to function. Use the arms to hold a nearby rock.
I extended both arms slowly. As I did, the camera lit up. The first thing I saw was the steel bulkhead. I could still see the images engraved on the bottom. It made my blood freeze. This monitor was small, but the image was perfectly clear. I held the surface of the cliff with the arms, but I was unable to find a steady spot.
Captain Morgan, find a protruding portion of the cliffside.
The only part of the wall that extended out, and that could be held, was the wheel. Negative, there is no protruding portion, I said. I felt like a coward, but after all that happened, I wanted nothing to do with the door.
Captain Morgan, listen to me. There is no other way.
I sighed. It was an anxious, nervous sigh. I wanted the nightmare to end, and the one thing I wanted to avoid above all else was the door. Reluctantly, I held the wheel with the mechanical arms. Both claws seemed to wrap around the edges perfectly.
Now, Captain Morgan.
The voice had changed. It was slow, monotonous.
Turn the wheel.
My face went pale.
Captain Morgan, turning the wheel will allow the vessel to ascend.
I shut the computer violently, pushing it away. I put my head in my hands and covered my ears. The feeling, the need to open the door was back. It made me furious.
Alex?
A voice came from the closed computer. I recognized the voice. The voice was distorted and it glitched at intervals, but it was unmistakable.
It only makes sense to open it.
It was Stanley's. This couldn't have been possible. Stanley's lifeless, or at least unconscious body was still on top of me, dripping blood on my chest. And yet, the voice from the computer sounded exactly like him.
Alex, if you don't turn the wheel, I will.
The voice said. It sent shivers down my spine.
This is what you wanted, isn't it?
Stanley's voice was perfectly calm.
I tried to stop you, and you won. And now you changed your mind?
My fingers were deep within my ears, trying to block out the sound. They were piercing as far as they could go. Still, I could hear the voice as if my hearing was perfect.
Why did you kill me, Alex? I wanted to help, to stop you.
I couldn't handle it. I didn't even know what the voice was talking about. I just wanted the horrible pain to go away.
You killed me over this.
The voice said, melancholy, but distant.
So now, if you don't open the door I died over, I will.
The pain in my head increased to unbearable levels. I screamed. It was as if I was being tortured. All I had to do was hit the button, and the pain would stop. I knew it would. That was the only way. Without thinking, I hit the button on the control panel. I heard the machinery whir, and the wheel rotated with a jolt to the side. The wheel stayed in its position for a few seconds, and then the view exploded in front of me. The door imploded inward so fast that disappeared would be a better word. The submersible exploded forward under the unfathomable pressure. Over 10,000 meters on the water and over 1,000 times the Earth's atmosphere, the pressure change was immense. Everything must have happened in a millisecond. For the instant the door had vanished, my vision went black. I cannot explain how it is possible that I survived, or how it is true that the submersible did not implode. But I awoke feeling as if I had slept for no more than a few seconds. My hand was still on the button, and everything in the cabin was in the exact same position as before. I couldn't understand how the vessel had stayed intact. It almost felt like the cut of a movie scene. One moment, the submarine was about to be demolished, and the next, it had been placed in another location. The question was, Where had the submarine been placed? I looked at the small monitor. At first, I saw nothing but darkness, and I had to move the mechanical arm to reveal the scene. One thing did appear on the monitor. It looked like a large, heavy beam of metal. It must have been twice the width of the submarine, and at least 4 times as long. At one point, it curved upward. Somehow, the submarine's ballast systems had come online, and I was not only able to ascend and descend, but move back and forth as well. The submersible was in perfect condition. I followed the metal beam to the point where it curved. I saw that it looped around, and that the beam was actually part of a large oval of metal. Connected to this was another oval. It was a chain. I had seen chains used in underwater construction, but this one was colossal. I followed the chain with the submarine, hoping it was attached to a larger structure and that I could follow it to find my way out. I must have followed at least 15 links before the massive chain abruptly stopped. At one point, there was only half a link. The metal had been broken in half. The giant link was split. The computer screen lit up suddenly, catching me off guard.
"Captain Morgan?"
said a voice from the computer.
"What the hell happened? You went dark, and now our scans detect that you're 500 meters from your previous location. We've been trying to reach you for hours."
I recovered my breath. "This is Alex. Can you hear me?" A brief silence.
"Captain, get up here, now! People are acting like lunatics. The crew has lost their minds."
I was frozen. I couldn't believe it. The nightmare wasn't over.
"Scans are going wild. What is happening down there?"
I was unable to process what I was hearing through the device. At that moment, something broke the silence of the water around me. It was a deep, echoing bellow. It sounded more like an earthquake shaking the water, or a distant roar of thunder. There was practically no sound, just an intense and distant rumble. The submarine literally trembled. I heard the metal rattle around me. I needed to know what was in the void, and my headlights were obviously not going to help. At this depth, the water was indescribably heavy. It almost felt thick, and it was so dark that there was no way I would be able to see my surroundings. I needed another way to see where I was. I set the submarine to remain still and shut off any unnecessary systems. I turned to the sonar display. The returns showed a faint signal, very distant, which got stronger and weaker. Something was shifting in the water far away. The void around me shook again. For it to move as fast as the returns showed, yet seemed slow and sluggish, its size must have been unfathomable.
"Captain, what are you doing? You are clear to ascend. Ascend immediately. Help me. The crew is outside. I don't know how much longer the door will hold."
I couldn't comprehend what I was hearing, but I wasn't going to stay down there any longer. I wanted out. I took control of the submersible and initiated my ascent. Suddenly, the communication device came to life again. I heard glass break and a brief scream. Then, silence. As I went up, more and more broken chains passed me by, each larger than the last. Some were as big as houses, others larger than airplanes. "Captain," the voice was distorted. "The great chains are broken. We await his arrival. Goodbye, Captain." Silence. Stanley has died of his injuries. I am alone on the research ship. But at least I'm on the surface now. The bodies of my surface crew are floating in the water. I don't know why, but they all jumped. The sensors light up with data, and I can do nothing but watch as the numbers rise to impossible levels. I've been writing for some time, but I will make this portion brief. Unfortunately, I have a deadline. There are at least 4 earthquakes, the smallest of these measuring at a magnitude of 9.5. The waves these have produced are hitting toward coastal cities in Japan, the Philippines, New Guinea, Taiwan, and Guam. It's as if I am a spectator to the apocalypse. Screens light up and alarms blare, and I am forced to stand witness. Worst of all, scans detect seismic activity within the Mariana Trench, in the exact portion where my expedition took place. I've seen too much to assume it is an earthquake. Whatever it is, It is also ascending. According to the data, it will surface in 5 minutes. Its size measures approximately 2,000 meters in length. I will not be alive to witness it. It is predicted to surface beneath my ship. Whatever those massive chains were meant to hold, they are no longer serving their purpose